This man is a Confederate?
Blood is not gray or blue. It's all one color.
You want to be free. You gotta take it.
You cannot start a war to save a union.
You cold-blooded savages!
You have no idea what you're signing up for here.
Dear God.
Are you afraid?
Do I seem afraid to you?
Mercy Street, coming in January, only on PBS.
Well, I think there's something about the experience of war that it definitely brings out the very best and the very worst in people, and certainly in our characters. And that's something that we've certainly been playing around with. Well, I knew, just to preface this, I knew I wanted to tell a story set during the Civil War from the vantage point of the doctors and the nurses, so I started looking for a general hospital behind the front lines. And I went digging and found the story of Mansion House Hotel/hospital. It was a grand luxury hotel turned into a hospital. And the fact that it was in Alexandria intrigued me, because Alexandria was occupied by the Union all 4 years of the war. So to have a southern town occupied by the Union, we automatically had North and South built in. There are many different elements that came together.
I think what this show hopefully demonstrates, and the great historical storytellers like David McCullough and Ken Burns demonstrate, is that it can be incredibly dramatic, it can be comedic, it can be relatable, and it can be relevant to our lives today. And so hopefully it's an experience that's entertaining, but one that also sort of gives you thought to understand where we've come from, and that might inform where we want our lives to go.
It was a bit daunting for me, definitely. I'd never done anything like this before. I'd done one film in this era, but it was not quite so realistic. So I wasn't as worried about it with that one. With this, I was really worried. That was maybe the scariest part of the whole thing for me, was making that feel right, but also not making it feel like a kind of stuffy costume drama where you can't relate to the characters.
For me, it was like a win-win. I grew up watching Gone with the Wind. I've seen it over 100 times. And so when it was, did you want to read a period drama about the Civil War for an audition? It was like, this is the greatest thing that's ever happened.
There was no stone unturned, which was fabulous for us. So I don't think there was any hesitation that we might get something wrong, because somebody always had our back with that, which was lovely.
We were shooting for about 3 months in Richmond and Petersburg in Virginia. Richmond was the capital of the Confederacy, so to be portraying a Union hospital in Richmond was quite interesting. And I think you all felt that. Mm-hmm. I mean, to be able to spend time at weekends going to visit historical sites, it just informed your performances, I think.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And it was just the kind of being around the history, even where we stayed, you walk outside, it's the cobblestone streets, and we were sort of steeped in it the entire time we were shooting.
These women, these characters are based on real characters, and that I found fascinating, that you could have such strong women in a period in history when women really didn't have a voice. They didn't have a voice 150 years ago, not the way they do today.
I think during the war, a lot of women, especially in the South, were encouraged to be Southern belles, which means they were genteel and kind and soft-spoken. And I think that a lot of women during the time really had this internal struggle with wanting to branch out and be heard and have a purpose and an independence, but also to uphold this Southern gentility. And I think even today, a lot of girls are silenced just by society. And I think that people still do struggle to make themselves be heard. But Emma's story is definitely a story that I'm sure a lot of women can relate to.
She does. Well, she's very passionate about what she believes in. She's, an abolitionist. She's a feminist, of that time. And she comes into it with a very kind of black and white view of it. There are Confederate soldiers that are being tended to in the hospital, and she basically comes into it thinking, I'm not even going to give them a glass of water, I'm not going to help them, and that's one thing that she has to learn to soften a bit, is to see everyone as human beings, even though her views are obviously very different.
The struggles that my character goes through are very human, relatable struggles that we struggle with every day, with ambition and competition and women not supporting other women. one of the most relevant topics now. But so I like the fact that my conflict in this story is not specific to the Civil War. It just sheds light on the human condition.
Well, I think what was so immediately appealing when we had the opportunity to sit with Lisa and David and read some of the initial scripts is, we're accustomed to the Revolutionary War and the Civil War, being sort of these iconic periods, rightfully so, that are set up on a pedestal, and we look up at them. And there are certain experiences. I remember when I first saw 1776 on stage, where suddenly, Benjamin Franklin was not sort of this musty figure making these great declarations that all inspire us, but, he was a man who was in the Continental Congress, and they were swatting flies and sweaty, and they wanted to get home to their wives. And suddenly it was somebody that I recognized. And I think what they conceived of here was something that was set during a period with which we all have, varying degrees of familiarity. But suddenly I could recognize people, and I was interested in their story, and I was understanding what their struggles were, and then wondering, well, how might I have dealt with that at the time? So suddenly the challenges become very personal, but again, the way it's been executed and so wonderfully performed is that you sort of delight in them. Sometimes you're a bit horrified by them, but at the same time, you can't resist them.